run, run, run. So I started running. They say, faster, faster.
Miraculously, no one was hurt. It was one of dozens of mishaps and accidents in recent years. A 2003 fire aboard the Queen of Surrey. In 2000, a collision with a small pleasure boat killed 2 people. In 1995, another crash into a marina. And in 1992, a string of collisions and accidents that left dozens of people injured and 2 dead. Captain Richard Stanbridge worked for BC Ferries for almost a decade. None of it surprises him.
When I worked for them, safety issues were something that if it cost any money, it seemed to me that the corporation wasn't overly keen on doing it.
In the late 90s, Stanbridge was responsible for implementing new safety standards at BC Ferries. It was shortly after the 1994 sinking of the ferry Estonia in the Baltic Sea. More than 800 people died in that accident. The International Maritime Organization, or IMO, introduced sweeping safety standards, but the Queen of the North, built in 1969, didn't meet them.
This vessel would not be allowed to sail for the past 15 or so years in Northern Europe or places like that because it didn't meet safety standards.
Well, she's an older vessel and what we call a one-compartment ship.
Naval architect Dave McMillan studied the vessel's stability during a post-Estonia review of the BC ferry fleet.
2-compartment is the standard.
He says overall she was safe, but not as safe as she could have been.
She can withstand the flooding of 1 compartment and maintain, still be afloat and maintain stability. More modern vessels today can withstand 2 compartments, 2 adjacent compartments flooding and still remain afloat and stable.
There are 35 ships in the BC ferry fleet. Queen of the North was one of the oldest. But old or new, Richard Stanbridge says a ship is only as safe as the people running it.
The investigation into the sinking of the Queen of the North is expected to take months. But a few days after the ferry sank, investigators sent down a couple of mini-subs to take a look at the damage. From the deep darkness, the wreck emerges like a ghost. The once proud flagship of BC's ferry fleet now sits on the ocean floor, about 400 meters below the surface. The wreck, which is partially buried in silt, appears to be intact, but its hull has been ripped open. When the Queen of the North sank, it took to the bottom nearly 250,000 liters of fuel. Small amounts of that fuel have already started leaking out, and people who live near the wreck are concerned about the potentially disastrous environmental consequences. They want the mess cleaned up. But as the CBC's Melanie Nagy reports, that won't be quick or easy.
How much are they getting? We haven't been told. You know, how much is left that they think is going to pop up from the boat yet.
It's an informal meeting, but the questions being asked are crucial. These men make a living fishing the waters off Hartley Bay. Oil and diesel leaking from the Queen of the North is slowly making its way to their traditional harvest grounds.
We understand we have some wildlife now that have died. Some birds were found. I think it's only the beginning of the extent of the damage caused by fuel.
More than 225,000 liters of fuel was on board when the ferry sank in BC's Inside Passage. No one knows how much has escaped. So far, officials say the impact on the environment is minimal. But here in the village, those words are of little comfort. The ocean is their revenue source. Fish are sold locally. Clams and seaweed are exported around the world. People here are worried about a sudden release of fuel from the ship's tanks. Polluted waters could devastate their livelihood.
We're the ones right here now left standing with whatever outcome happens. So we're trying to catch up with everybody else on, you know, what's happening out there.
We came down just south.
Officials say they're trying to determine just how much the oil slick is expanding to ensure cleanup is effective and proactive. But it's not easy. The limited amount of oil sitting on the surface makes it difficult to absorb.
Unless it gathers in a spot, it's very, very difficult to control.
One way to deal with the problem, go directly to the source. Options available. Use specialized equipment to suck out the oil, or encase the ship in a mixture of concrete and epoxy to stop the leakage, or raise the vessel. All techniques used in other marine accidents. But BC Ferries says it's not quite sure what's right for the Queen of the North. The ship is much bigger, much deeper, and potentially much more costly. Melanie Nagy, CBC News, Prince Rupert.
The Transportation Safety Board is sending down more mini-submarines to examine the wreck to try to gather more clues about what went wrong. If a new ferry is ever built, some crew members and passengers have asked that it be named after the village of Hartley Bay to honor the people who saved their lives. And that's News in Review. I'm Carla Robinson. Thanks for watching. Days to freedom.
Norman Kember, British hostage, 2 Canadian hostages have been released as a result of a multinational force operation.
The story of the kidnapping in Iraq, the release, and the long, excruciating wait in between. This week on News in Review, Iraq rescue. 2 Canadians are freed. Hello, I'm Carla Robinson. It is a terrifying story, and a heartbreaking one too. 4 men who were held captive in Baghdad for 4 months. They were working as peace activists for a group called Christian Peacemaker Teams. One, American Tom Fox, would be killed by the kidnappers. The others, Britain's Norman Kember and Canadians Harmeet Singh Sudhin and James Loney, survived to come home to see those who had worried, prayed, cried, and hoped through the long days, weeks, and months. And we begin with one of those homecomings, the happy payoff for all that hoping and praying. The CBC's Cameron McIntosh reports.
The joy of answered prayers. James Loney says it was the hope of this moment that kept him going. Embracing friends, then turning to face a throng of reporters.
I heard a rumor that there might be some interest in my arrival.
It's 4 months to the day since he and 3 other Christian peace workers were kidnapped in Baghdad. Deadlines to kill the men came and went. At times, so did hope.
For 118 days, I disappeared into a black hole, and somehow, by God's grace, I was spit out again. My head is swirling, and there are times when I can hardly believe it's true. It was a terrifying, profound, powerful, transformative, and excruciatingly boring experience. Since my release, my rescue from captivity, I have been in a constant state of wonder, bewilderment, and surprise.
As for American Tom Fox, the one captive who was killed,
we are only 3/4. Tom is not coming home with us. I am so sorry.
But not only is the candle still...
In Britain, fellow captive Norman Kember found solace in church. The other Canadian, Harmeet Sudhin, is with family on their way to New Zealand. Tired and humbled, Loney ended with this.
I am forever and truly grateful. It's great to be alive.
He took no questions and left under a police escort. Back to family and friends who are just happy to see him again.
It was just great to be able to give him a hug and know he was okay.
He still has a sparkle in his eye, and Jim has always been a very healthy, fit person, so I'm confident he will recover.
Loney said nothing about his captors and offered no insights into his rescue. However, he says he does want to share his story with the public after he spent some time with his family and friends. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Toronto.
Joy on that day, so different from the dread many days before when Canadians heard that James Loney and the others had been taken. A group called the Swords of Righteousness Brigades claimed it was responsible. It said the hostages would be killed unless Iraqi prisoners were released from American jails. Patrick and Claudette Loney were among those who made appeals to the kidnappers. They spoke to the CBC a few days after their son became a hostage and talked about how worried they'd been about James going to Iraq in the first place.
And I told him, I said, you know, this is, you're asking for big trouble if something goes wrong. I said, you're in a war now. This is, you know, this isn't child's play. He says, I know. He says, this is...
We want James home.
The appeals weren't just from family members, and they weren't just from Canadians. In Ramallah, Palestinian activists gathered and demanded the release of the hostages. A leading member of Britain's Muslim community got involved. He went to Baghdad to try to help. An envoy from the Canadian Islamic Congress also traveled to the Iraqi capital to make an appeal.
Those of us who dealt with the CPT workers, we know that they are very honest, very clean. We never had any situation which shows that they had any evangelist goals or try to convert somebody from one religion to the other. We always find them very sincere. They support justice and they support peace.
You heard there another reference to the CPT, or Christian Peacemaker Teams. To find out more about what the group does, the CBC's Adrian Arsenault traveled to the West Bank.
The Palestinians of Hebron know them better than most. Know the red hats, know the faltering Arabic, know the slogan of these Christian peacemakers, getting in the way.
You can't make a difference for on the ground. Everyone from a distance. Someone has to be in the middle of things.
Canadian Diane Jansen, American Rich Meyer, on rounds in the West Bank. What Canadian hostage James Loney was supposed to be doing here this week, observing treatment of Palestinians at checkpoints.
They've been here 15 minutes. It's a normal ID check.
Escorting kids to and from school to ensure they aren't attacked by radical Jewish settlers. It's happened before.
In general, the Palestinians that we accompany to their fields or to their schools are in more danger than we are. So it's a little hard to claim that we're the brave ones.
They brush aside charges they're naive or too idealistic.
The Christian peacemakers are part of almost a subculture here in the occupied territories. These groups of foreigners who come here for months at a time working to protect Palestinians. These are people who sometimes move from organization to organization and cause to cause. Iraq, the West Bank, fighting poverty in their home countries, and always maintaining this philosophy that they are fighting for justice.
It's sometimes ugly. The Christian peacemakers and the group known as the International Solidarity Movement are often together at protests against Israel's barrier. Some of the 4 hostages have worked with both organizations.
And you don't think that by getting in the way, literally, you're putting an awful lot of other people at risk?
We ask that question. If we are putting a lot of other people at risk, we'll leave.
For now, they stay at their tiny offices. Time moves slowly.
Thanks for the update. Bye.
As they search for news of their colleagues. John Lyons is particularly worried about his friend Tom Fox.
I mean, he'd do anything for peace, and it's just so wrong that he's been held, that he of all people is being held.
They don't proselytize, they insist, but they do have faith. And in a corner of Hebron, with their minds on Iraq, faith, they say, is critical. Adrian Arsenault, CBC News, Hebron.
In the meantime, there were fleeting images of the captives from videos released by the kidnappers. In one of them, the 2 Canadians spoke of their treatment.
We are being treated well. We are both well. All of us are well.
The kidnappers had threatened to kill their hostages by December 8th. That deadline was extended many times, and days upon days of waiting and wondering piled up for the families of the captured men. Early in March, another video and intense concern about one of the hostages, Tom Fox, wasn't shown. On March 10th, word from the U.S. State Department that Fox had been killed. He was 54 years old. A few weeks later, a friend of Tom Fox spoke to television reporters. The occasion, the release of the other hostages.
About Tom, actually, I thought afterward how happy he would be that the other 3 are free.
Not a lot is known about the operation to rescue the other three. Canada's top secret military force, JTF-2, was thought to be on the ground in Iraq at the time. Prime Minister Stephen Harper would only say whoever was there won't be staying.
Any involvement that Canada has had on the ground in this particular matter was obviously targeted simply at the question of Canadian hostages. These are, as I say, represent various agencies, the Government of Canada. Any personnel that have been present for this particular crisis will obviously not remain.
British Special Forces, or SAS, were believed to be a big part of the operation.
The SAS would have been responsible for the assault on the building. So that would have been the part that they would have been totally in control of.
Officially, Canada isn't part of the war in Iraq. Still, a handful of Canadian troops were there to help deal with the hostage crisis.
Well, that included some Canadian forces, as I understand it, in a very limited way on the ground, but that was focused on this rescue operation.
The RCMP was involved too.
A multinational team, and it included representatives from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, other agencies from Canada, and they did a terrific job with us, as well as obviously the Americans.
An American Major General described the scene.
The hostages were indeed together. They were bound. They were together. There were no kidnappers in the area. You know, as we study who could conduct these kinds of operations, this seems to be a kidnapping cell that has been robust over the last several months in conducting these kind of kidnappings.
The kidnappers are thought to have fled the scene. As for the now former hostages, they prepared to go home, but not before having some cake. Harmeet Singh Sudan's 33rd birthday was celebrated at the Canadian Embassy in Baghdad. A couple of weeks later, Sudan was back at home in New Zealand and ready to talk about what he'd gone through. He talked to the CBC's Ioana Romeliotis.
For months, the story unfolded in a silent reel. The unspoken, terrifying. Now, for the first time, a clearer picture is emerging of life in captivity and of life in freedom.
Okay, yep,
In his first television interview with a Canadian network, former hostage Harmeet Singh Sudan spoke at length to the CBC from Auckland, New Zealand, and described an ordeal few Canadians have heard.
They didn't communicate with us much in the first 2 weeks. We had no idea what was going on, who they were. We were just speculating all the time. It was the most tense time for us. There was one moment where, this was a few days into our captivity, where they accused us of conspiring to escape. And there was sort of a clampdown where they changed our handcuffs from, we were handcuffed individually in front of our bodies. And then from that point on, we were handcuffed to each other. And Jim and I were actually slapped at that point. That was the only abuse, physical abuse, we suffered.
Sudan had been in Iraq for 4 days when he and 3 other peace activists, including fellow Canadian Jim Loney, were kidnapped. The hours turned to days, weeks, months. A routine set in.
It was important for Tom to have a worship session every day, and that helped. We would have a Bible study or scripture study or philosophical study session in the evening as well. Norman was very good at making up games that we would play out of cardboard that we found in the room. And Jim and I had interesting discussions about racism and other topics as well.
It helped to pass the time, and it was a lifeline, as were thoughts of seeing his family again and a notebook his captors later provided. He brought it home with him.
I wrote a few poems. I made some lists of things I should do when I get out. And I was just drawing shapes I would see in the paint peeling off the ceiling or water damage on the roof, on the ceiling.
Often during the 1-hour interview, Sudan sounded righteous, idealistic, but appeared to wrestle with a contradiction. He is a sworn pacifist, a pacifist soldiers risk their lives to save.
I'm very grateful for the individuals that participated in the operation that led to our release. However, for me personally, I have a principle of non-violence to maintain, and see, whatever operation occurred was not in my control. And if it had been in my control, and if there was any possibility of violence, I wouldn't have used that option.
Sudin admitted he doesn't know what other option existed, whether his captors, who he says he couldn't hate, would have eventually killed him too. He's made it home, but the questions he's brought with him suggest Sudin is not free yet. Joanna Brimiliotis, CBC News, Toronto.
It's thought there are more than 40 foreigners still held hostage in Iraq, but they aren't the only victims. It's estimated that about 50 Iraqis are kidnapped every week. And that's News in Review. I'm Carla Robinson. Thanks for watching. Riding high.
I make tons of money, buddy. As much as I want, and that's bottom line, right?
I think the new Alberta is the land of opportunity.
On News in Review today, boom times, Alberta's red-hot economy. Hello, I'm Carla Robinson. They call it the Alberta Rocket. Fueled by high oil prices, the province's economy has taken off. Unemployment is low, wages are high. Thousands and thousands of people are heading there looking for jobs. But all that new wealth is causing some problems, not just for some Albertans, but for other Canadians too. The CBC's Havard Gould looks at Alberta's economic boom and how it's being powered by the world's thirst for oil.
The boom begins here. Trucks by the hundreds, each lugging hundreds of tons of oil-soaked soil. Monster refineries turning out 1 million barrels of oil a day. The vast oil sands as busy as billions of dollars of investment can make it. This is the boom that is changing Canada, the power of prosperity echoing across the land, for better and sometimes also worse. The capital of this boom is without question Fort McMurray, the city the oil sands are building at a frantic pace. 100 people arrive every week to work long hours for very big money, fueling up with coffee.
It's work, sleep, and eat. That's it. Well, right now I'm on my way to work. I come home, I'll have supper, go out for an hour or so, and go back to bed.
I make tons of money, buddy. As much as I want, and that's bottom line, right? That's the way McMurray is. Fort McMurray is for anybody that has any sort of drive. Alberta, though, I could say that about all of Alberta. It's all the same. Oil is a wonderful thing, and that's bottom line, isn't it, or what?
It's not just Fort McMurray. The Prosperity Party is all over Alberta. Hundreds of companies, millions of people, all enjoying a modern-day gold rush.
What do I think the new Alberta is? I think the new Alberta is the land of opportunity. I think that people from all across Canada, in particular young people, are coming here to find opportunity.
It's a lot of fun, a lot of rich people, lots of young people who are actually making it.
Among those making it, Peter Boyd, formerly of Toronto. His company, a high-tech scout in the never-ending search for more oil. He supports the arts, runs a breezy, open-concept office. Knowing he must keep his staff happy, the boom meaning unhappy employees can always be raided by others.
Well, we set up this little cafe to serve a healthy breakfast and a healthy lunch every day for our employees. It's just another little perk.
Booms have a way of going bust. It has happened before to oil and gas. The risk, part of the excitement in Calgary.
It's not just about wealth. There's a spirit, there's a more positive outlook of perhaps a more sustainable business environment. there is a wave of wealth, there's a wave of optimism, new companies being created, new employment being created. It is a robust economy. But we're all pretty cautious still. Nobody's quite swaggering yet, although I'm sure there's a few always. But, you know, we know what happens after boom.
This one is supposed to be different. Powered by global giants, emerging, thirsty for as much energy as anyone can provide. The biggest problem facing Alberta is the growing labor shortage.